Okay, welcome everyone. We're with Bradford Russell, Director of Architecture and Engineering with BR Architects in Richardson, Texas. Bradford, thanks for joining the show.
Sure, thank you.
So Bradford, I'd like to set up the situation here. This nation, the United States, sees more tornadoes and other high wind activity than any other place on earth, something like 1,500 high wind events a year. Community storm shelters is the topic today, and they play such a critical role in maintaining safety in our cities, towns, and neighborhoods. I'd love for you, Bradford, to give us sort of the current state of community storm shelter design and development. In your opinion, is the nation well equipped to handle these severe wind events?
Okay, first of all, let's define what a community storm shelter is about. It is to carry a minimum of 16 occupants, and these area requirements of the shelter are set for by the number of occupants, obviously, from 16, I've seen them from 16 to well over 500 occupants. Many times, the rooms and spaces of a building, a school, or a fire station will serve a dual functions to economically accommodate these shelter requirements. For instance, a school gymnasium or a cafeteria in a school or a parking garage in the school can serve as a storm shelter also, or maybe a class or lecture room in a fire station. So discussing this community storm shelter design, the designers must become familiar with the ICC 500. And the current ICC 500 is a 2014, but the new ICC 500 2020 will be issued later this year. And it will pick up some different updates to the 2014. For instance, flying debris, test impact locations on components, and speed of flying debris hitting these components, and the minimum number of test impacts. And this all centers around the reason being is in past storms, the components have been the failure mechanism for the storm shelters, but the overall system itself is very well functioning.
That's interesting. Yeah. So can we go into this standard? So it's changing for 2021, Bradford, is that correct?
Yes. Well, let's talk about the standards in general.
Okay.
FEMA created the first storm shelter design requirements back in 1998 with a P320. And then in 2000, FEMA published a follow-up document entitled FEMA P361, whereby community safe rooms are built for groups of 16 or more people. But during this time of development, the International Code Council, the ICC, and the National Storm Shelter Association, NSSA, of Texas Tech formed a national committee to develop a consensus standard to define the design and construction requirements of tornado and hurricane storm shelters. This was where the initiation of the ICC 500, and it was first published in 2008 and subsequently updated in 2014. And there again, we're going to see a new update at the end of this year, 2020.
Can you give us some specific examples of the components and what's changing?
Sure. The impact requirements for shutters, for folding partitions that separate the storm shelter from other places of the building. And here they have to sustain a calculated impact test, and then a duration, sequential returning impacts they also had to sustain. So they can't just sustain one impact of this higher loading, but they got to sustain several impacts over a time duration. Mm-hmm. So that prepares the storm shelter for the actual event, because the hurricane or the tornado, which will carry a higher wind, they're constantly throwing things in there and impacting structures in the school or in the town, and destroying buildings.
Hmm. Have you seen, as an architect and engineer specializing in these spaces, have you seen, among your clients and, other firms that you work with, an increase in resilience design or demand for that? I mean, we've been writing about it for 4 or 5 years. It goes beyond the high wind events and gets into climate change, if you want to call it that, or flood, flood mitigation measures. I mean, is that a bigger business for people like you?
Well, I'll tell you, you're talking about resilience, and generally speaking, people don't want to pay for resilience unless they know they're going to be in danger. Specifically, they're willing to take a risk. But beyond the mandatory design of essential facilities and Group E occupancies, schools and so forth, I did not see many storm shelters designed and constructed. They all had to be constructed, mandated by the code.
Mhm.
Obviously, there are a few home or business owners who have been impacted by high wind events in the past or heard of others impacted and try to provide themselves and maybe their employees or their family with protected environments for these special events. So the storm shelters to be designed by must be designed by a practicing structural engineer and provided with thoroughly tested components and assembled by competent contractors to really serve their purpose.
Mm-hmm. Bradford Russell, I'd like to thank you for your time and all your great work with this very important segment of the commercial building market. So Bradford, thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Take care.